Welcome to the ResearchWorks podcast, broadcasting live from the Oceania Academy of Cerebral Palsy and Other Childhood Onset Disabilities Conference 2026 in the beautiful city of Hobart, Australia. Join Dr. Dana Poole and the ResearchWorks team as we bring you an exclusive series of interviews with visionary keynote speakers and leading presenters, captured right here amid the groundbreaking discussions and innovations shaping the future of disability research and care.
Hello, everyone. I'm so glad you've decided to join us. We are here at Oceania Conference in Hobart, Tasmania, Australia. Oceania is definitely a whole lot easier to say than Oz ACPDM.
Sure.
And
Yes.
to join us for our first conversation during the welcome reception. So it is quite loud. There's people around. We're all going to be staring at each other and reading each other's lips a little bit, I think. But we do have a friend of the show, Cathy Morgan. Welcome back to the microphone.
Oh, thank you so much. It's great to be here. And I've just realised my first conference, which was Oz ACPDM, was 20 years ago.
Wow. Is it really?
Yeah, so 2006. That was my very first one.
Oh, that's
so here we are 20
fabulous.
years later, still attending.
Still
Haven't missed one
attending.
in all that time.
I love that. And so you would have seen the progression of the field over that time and the caliber and the quality of the research that's been done. Before we get into your paper, I do need to introduce Marissa's here on the microphone as well. Want to
Thanks
say
for
hello
having
to
me.
everyone?
It's great to be back. Great to be in Hobart.
I think it's really cool before we get into this paper to talk a little bit about this morning. We were at a pre-conference workshop that you chaired so beautifully, kept everyone on time, but curated a wonderful workshop for everyone to listen to. I would say, seeing that you've been here for 20 years coming to the conference, what will be your reflections on what you heard this morning and where the field's gone?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question because I often do stop and reflect on what's changed.
Yeah.
And I would say in 2006, I do remember being blown away by how thoughtful everybody was being and the kind of interesting questions that were being asked. But there was a lot of body functions and structure type papers being presented, which I'm not saying at all are unimportant. But now we have so much that's focused on activity and participation. And of course, because I really focus on early detection, early intervention, in 2006, I think there was hardly anything on that topic.
Yeah.
And now, there are streams in every day. There's pre-conference workshops, there's breakfast. It's so exciting to me personally
I bet.
see the breadth of work that's being done and how collaborative people are being. And we also saw this morning this great array of work that's being done across New Zealand, across Australia, Bangladesh. We heard from communities of practice there.
Brilliant.
And I just found that just so amazing to see how things have changed in 20 years. It's been great.
I love that. And what a time to be in the field at the moment. It's a really exciting industry. And as part of that, you are presenting a lot over the next few days. So coordinating this time was not the easiest thing, but we're very glad we got you. The paper that you're presenting, one of the papers you present at this conference is titled Accuracy of Early Markers to Predict Motor Severity, Type and Topography of Cerebral Palsy in Infants, a Systematic Review and Meta-Analysis.
Yeah, what a mouthful.
What a mouthful. But it does tell you exactly what you did.
Declarative title. They like that, apparently.
I kind of want to break down what is in this title, actually. Can you talk to us about early markers? Because I feel like the word early markers is quite a new term. What does that mean?
Well, it's really saying what are the things that we should be looking at or assessing to identify not just whether cerebral palsy is highly likely in this child, but also what are the particular assessments that are going to tell us a little bit more about the kind of cerebral palsy, the kind of trajectory this child is likely to be on. And I think in other conditions, markers often refer to blood tests or particular genetic tests or something like that, biopsies. We don't have that in cerebral palsy because of the heterogeneity. So what we're trying to look at is to say, can we describe cerebral palsy earlier than we're currently doing?
And I love that. That's such a great mindset to have as well, isn't it, in terms of why we need to do this. You just said before that the field has shifted a lot in terms of detection. Can you give us a little bit of a rundown? This is a bit of a history, I suppose, but it's happened in a very short period of time. What is the gold standard for early detection now? Like, what should we be expecting and seeing happen?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think in about 2014, we had a sort of a big summit, and I feel like this was a very important point in history where we got together with experts from around the world who were working in this space already.
Yeah.
And we got together and we talked about how are we going to make diagnosis happen earlier, because the research was going off about neuroplasticity, and we're going, but we don't diagnose these babies until the second year of life.
Right.
But everything's changing in the first year. So we had this summit, and that created working groups, and then we went off and did a whole bunch of reviews and then published the early detection guidelines in 2017. It was led by Iona, but it really did involve about 40 people.
Amazing.
And in that guideline, we were able to show that the general movements assessment, term MRI in particular, but early neuroimaging in general,
Right.
and specific neurological examination, when those things come together, you can detect cerebral palsy with very high degrees of certainty. And that's been shown in a few studies since that time as well. And I think around the world now, definitely in Australia and New Zealand, people are taking those guidelines on board and working out how am I going to implement that where I am.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think since 2017, I think you'll have seen an explosion of implementation
That's
studies
phenomenal.
around the world. So that's been
Kathy,
exciting.
I can vouch for
Go.
that. I
Yes.
remember starting in pediatrics. I started in adult physiotherapy and then went to pediatrics. And when I started in 2012, most children were getting diagnosed around 18 months to 2 years, sometimes even later. And the fact that, like you said, in this not that long a time, the amount of changes and how precise now we can be, it's amazing. And it flows to our clinic. We're seeing kids now,
Yeah.
from 7 or 8 months of age.
Yeah.
They want that targeted intervention.
It's
because,
true.
yeah.
And, parents will sometimes email and say things like, well, someone's told me that my child is high risk for cerebral palsy, but I don't know what early intervention to do. What should I do next? What's it going to, and we need to answer those questions because parents are asking for it now because they know it's possible to find a solution earlier.
Yeah. There's multiple components, isn't it? When you move in the field forward, there's the systems that need to be in place and the
Exactly.
training, and there's a lot involved. So coming back to this systematic review then, what was the actual objective? Why did you want to do this systematic review?
Well, really, what was happening for us, we started an early diagnosis clinic probably a year and a half after those guidelines were published. And in our early diagnosis clinic, parents were asking questions like, what does this mean for my child? Will my child walk? Will they go to school? All those sorts of questions. What parts of their body will be affected? And we really were struggling to give really consistent answers because sometimes we just didn't know. And so we thought it's a really important time to not just talk about diagnosis of cerebral palsy,
Yes.
but how is it going to affect this child? And it
Yes.
was kind of in response to family questions, and we really wanted, I guess, as curious people ourselves, to understand how early can we tell them more, because parents talk about a crystal ball.
Yeah.
They want us to prognosticate as much as we can, and we can't always do that. So we thought, let's look at the evidence and see what is the earliest time you could possibly classify whether this cerebral palsy will be spastic or dyskinetic, for example. What kind of severity level are we talking about, and what parts of the body will be affected? So that was the motivation.
And that's so crucial. I mean, how many times have we been with families who they ask us questions, and as a responsible clinician, you want to be careful with what you say because so much pins on what you might say about that trajectory, because people want to know what their child's going to look like and they want to start planning that. So this is really important work, isn't it?
Yeah, so important. And I want to make a big shout out to a colleague of mine, Dr. Anna Tavelda, who started this work, and she's actually the first author on this publication. She's no longer working with me, but she's still working in the space, and we're still working very hard to get this published. So shout out to Anna if you're listening.
Hello, Anna. We love you. We think you're brilliant. Okay, so what did you find? I mean, I'm sure you don't remember the numbers. If you do, I'm so impressed. But there were 59 publications,
48 studies.
And then 8,600 had CPs. That's actually quite a big review, really.
Yeah, it really is a big review. And I think on the first searches, those searches, 20,000 something papers.
Phenomenal.
And we got it all down to 58, which it's kind of shocking in a way. And I think the reason for that is we were really trying to find the earliest markers. That was really important, like how early.
Yeah.
And the second thing, we were trying to find papers that had used top-level predictive accuracy statistics.
Yes.
And the diagnosis had been made before 3 years.
Right.
So that kind of limited the numbers then.
Yes.
So we were trying to say, okay, we've got early detection happening now with the same data that we're getting early on. Is it going to help us say anything more about where this baby is heading in their trajectory?
Well, how about you tell us the results? I think maybe what was probably the most striking result for you first up?
Well, I think the place of term equivalent age MRI cannot be really underestimated. And, you know, in terms of severity, I would say that the term equivalent MRI is going to be the most predictive about whether the child will walk or not.
Wow. Right.
Well, the earliest one.
Yes.
The earliest time.
Yes.
So, you know, I think it is worth getting a term equivalent MRI. Of course, as I say that, I can give you a whole bunch of caveats, and that is around the person who reads the MRI, the scoring system that's applied to reading the MRI, the cohort that study was done on. You know, most of the data comes from preterm babies, actually, but we know that half of all kids with CP are term babies. So, you know, there are always caveats and limitations to what we're finding, but in a meta-analysis component, which we were able to do for severity, we found that term equivalent MRI was the most predictive in terms of will this child walk or not? And we're talking about accuracy over 85%.
Wow.
Yeah.
So from a GMFCS perspective, really that division sort of GMS level 1, 2 and 3 and 4 and 5?
It's a really good question, Dana, because when you look at these studies, some people reported their outcomes by GMFCS level.
Yes.
But the vast majority reported it by grouped GMFCS levels.
Oh, I see.
And some of them did 1 and 2 together.
Right.
And some of them did 1, 2 and 3 together. And that meant 4 and 5 were together or 3 to 5 were together. So we've kind of had to work in that kind of muddiness to make these kind of generalizations.
Sure.
But in general, certain patterns on MRI are going to predict whether a child is likely to walk or not.
Right. Okay.
Do you know what age currently children are having their MRIs?
Well, the kids who are sick as newborns, so if you think about the early detection algorithm, those with newborn detectable risks, they are most often having it around term equivalent. And this is where a lot of the data comes from.
Yep.
But of course, those kids with infant detectable risks, it's a different story because then you need an MRI, you need an anesthetic, to have an MRI. And so the risk profile changes for those older kids, and those children tend to have their scans a bit later.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's a really great result to know. And I guess there'll be further details about that as well. What about other imaging qualities? Did much of that come out, or was it all MRIs?
So I think the things that came out were that when you do advanced techniques, you know, like diffusion tensor imaging and things that I don't know very much about, you get some very nice, highly accurate results.
Right.
When I think about that, what it means for clinical settings, I get a bit worried because in a research study, you know, you have the top people looking at these scans in a very controlled way, and they score things in a very controlled way. But for an average family who may be born in a smaller hospital with less expertise, I'm not saying no expertise, it might not be quite so stark.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Cranial ultrasound is also really good. In fact, had equal specificity for severity as term MRI, but the sensitivity was not as good, which just means we won't pick up some of the milder kids with cranial ultrasound alone. But I don't want to diss it as a tool because it is really still very good and quite clinically useful.
Okay.
And is cranial ultrasound in practice still used a lot as a precursor to MRIs because it's easier to...
Yes, in preterm babies,
Yeah,
I
okay.
think. But in the term babies who are in a NICU, usually there's another reason, and often they'll go straight to MRI.
Sure. All right. So that was about neuroimaging. The next layer, what about the clinical assessments?
Yeah, so interestingly, the clinical assessments, the things that came out the highest, which won't surprise anybody listening to this podcast, would be the hand assessment of infants.
Yep.
And so in terms of understanding topography and severity of hand function, I think that's the only clinical tool we've really got.
Wow.
So the high on its own, sort of from about 5 months, is quite predictive of whether a child with a unilateral injury will have CP or not, because we know not everybody who has a stroke, for example, will end up with CP.
Yes.
But the high gives us such important additional information. So I think that that's going to be a really important part of the classification process well into the future, which is great. And I think the Hammersmith, where it came out really well in our study, was in predicting bilateral cerebral palsy.
I see.
So with a certain cut scores, and I can't remember what they are off the top of my head, but they're published by Domenico Romeo. They found that infants who had certain cut scores at 3, 6, 9 and 12 months are highly predictive of bilateral cerebral palsy with very high sensitivity and specificity.
Wow.
Unfortunately, a lot of the high studies we all know and love didn't meet our criteria because they hadn't always used the same set of stats we were after.
Okay.
So it doesn't mean that they're not a useful test, of course. It's very useful. But in terms of what we included, that's where the Hein really showed its best evidence.
Can I ask a little bit more about the Hein in relation to this? Because obviously here we're talking about using these assessment tools for early detection of cerebral palsy. And within that, if you look at the actual assessments itself, the different clinical examinations, there are things like reflexes. There are things that I think have, reflexes have made its way into a lot of social media about how you can alter a reflex. And so I think there's an element here where there might be the thought of saying, look, can we alter a reflex to influence the Hein? What are your thoughts on that? Because I think there's a little bit of that creeping in. And when you were mentioning that about the Hein and being predictive, what could that look like?
That concept sits very much in traditional understanding of neuroscience, which we've kind of shown through so many studies now is not really that relevant. I think the Hein is a really great test, and there is a section in it, if you know it well, called Reflexes and Reactions. And that is actually quite predictive in cerebral palsy because we know it's an upper motor neuron lesion. And so you are going to see reflexive change. Whether you can alter those reflexes or not is something completely different. And so the Hein is never intended as an outcome measure, but it was intended as a tool to describe the neurological function of a child between 2 and 24 months. That's its use. We don't use it as an outcome measure after our interventions. It's not what it's designed for, and it's not sensitive to change like that. It does change over time as children get older. But there's some very good normative data to say, a typically developing child by about 6 months is going to score very similar to a 12-month-old child. So, I don't think that's the intention of the Hein, and certainly not how it was used in any of the work in this review. And I don't think it should be used like that. I will say one other thing. We looked at the place of reflexes in diagnosis. We were expecting to find something, but there was nothing high quality. The first time a reflex becomes useful in a classification for cerebral palsy is from 12 months, only for GMFCS 3 to 5, when the parachute reaction is not there yet. That's the only thing that came up in all of the papers we looked at.
Okay.
And so I think that's something to take home. It's not that you can train the parachute reaction. It's telling you that the child's neurological system is not completely intact. And it is associated with more severe forms of CP.
And that's an important point, isn't it? Is that it's a marker, but it's not something that you would treat.
No. Definitely not.
Was there anything that surprised you about the results, or did it feel like everything was quite aligned? What are your thoughts there, Cathy?
Oh, that's a very good question. I think what surprised me was how blunt it is. I think we'd love to be able to say your child is going to be GMFCS 1 or 2, but we actually don't know if they're going to be 4 or 5. They're going to be probably 4 or 5, not either 4 or 5. You know what I'm saying? So it's blunt in terms of severity. And I think material on hand function, which is absolutely critical, is very minimal. And really it's Leanne Zaksuski's work that has got the highest level of evidence around what is the likely hand function going to be like in the future. And that's around mild, moderate or severe. So that surprised me, that the bluntness of it. The other thing that surprised me was this lack of differentiation between bilateral cerebral palsy that just affects the lower limbs, like
Sure.
it's commonly called diplegia, and bilateral cerebral palsy that affects forelimbs. There was very little data on that anywhere.
Wow.
There were a lot
Okay.
of gaps in etiology. We didn't find any papers on maldevelopments, for example, and we know that that's a proportion of children who go on to have CP.
Absolutely.
So from an etiology point of view, there was a few surprises
That's
in there.
interesting.
So we've got a lot we need to do, and we need to collect prospective data on this material, which is what we're doing now, of course.
Oh, well, that was going to be our next question, right? So
Where to? Yeah.
Because, I mean, big work like this always leads to that. You know, you don't do this big work without wanting to know what the next steps are going to be. So how has this shaped what you're doing now?
Yeah, very, very good. Our minds were merged at that point.
That's right.
We are running an early kind of surveillance of CP, or a natural history study for cerebral palsy between 0 and 2 years of age. And this is an international collaboration. We started here in Cerebral Palsy Alliance, but we've got colleagues from Denmark, from Sweden, from Italy, from the United States. We're just about to get Georgia on board as well.
Wow.
And hopefully this year some lower middle income settings as well. And the aim of this study is to track developmental trajectories of children high risk of CP with CP between 0 and 2. And we're going for 1,000 babies, Dana.
Oh,
Wow.
my goodness. That's phenomenal. That's huge.
Yeah. So we're at just over 500 now.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So it's kind of a very much a collaboration, and it's just been so interesting. I
Brilliant.
mean, hard work,
yeah, I
but
bet.
so interesting. And so we'll be looking at the imaging, their general movements assessment, the Hammersmith, but a whole lot of other developmental domains as well, which of course
Phenomenal.
very important.
So when do you think the 1,000th baby will be? Have you got a projection time?
I wish I could. I mean, we started just before COVID, so you can imagine if you looked at a kind of a graph, it would have been very slow. It has started to increase now, which is
we all
wonderful.
love an exponential curve. It's a
Yeah,
good
we
thing.
obviously need more funding for some of the sites. And
Yeah.
so that's something that we're
Sure.
going to be concentrating on this year. But,
Sure.
you know, slow and steady wins the race, I say.
Yes.
I'd love to be finished in the next 4 years.
Yeah.
But, you know, you've got to wait for them all to turn 2.
Of
right?
course, yes.
So that means we need to get another 500 kids in the next 2 years-ish. So, you know, we welcome people who want to join that study from anywhere in the world.
How can they join that study? What do they need to do?
can contact me, C. Morgan, at cerebralpalsy.org.au. We have a data sharing agreement that's in place that they would need to sign up to.
Phenomenal.
We can provide training on the tools that we're using. We can't provide funding for the site necessarily, but we can
Right.
provide all the wraparounds that are needed for data collection and training and things like
Phenomenal.
that.
Wow.
Minimum of 50 participants if you want to be a site.
Right,
Okay.
right. Oh, well, definitely encourage everyone to take a look at that. That's so phenomenal. Cathy, this is a bit of a left field question for me now, which we probably should have discussed earlier. But anyway, let's throw it into it. So if we're detecting children with cerebral palsy earlier and we're understanding what they do earlier and we're providing hopefully good interventions earlier, what do you think about the natural trajectory or what do you think about the natural trajectory over the course of childhood and adolescence? Do you think it will look different to what we see now? Do you think there's the potential for that to look different?
Look, it's a really hard question. I think we all want to know the answer
Yeah,
to
I
that
know.
question. I think there's definitely potential because neuroplasticity is a thing.
It
I mean,
is,
we
yeah.
can't measure it in the clinic, you know, with an MRI just to say, okay, well, is that cortical spinal tract got thicker after my, 20-week intervention or not? We
Yeah.
can't actually see it so
Yeah.
easily. I mean, it can be done, but we don't do it in clinical practice. So I feel if we are working at our best to harness the neuroplasticity principles as close to the time of injury as possible,
Yeah.
and we get it at the right dose and the right intensity, we are optimizing what can happen. I do think there are times where that intervention has changed the course of a child's trajectory, but I think it's very hard to show that in a clinical setting.
It is, isn't
Yeah,
it?
it's so hard.
It really is.
But I think it's also important to remember that, you know, every person is their own journey. They don't think about the massive picture. Every family don't think about
Of course.
necessarily those kinds of things. They want to know that they've done the best for their child. And as clinicians, we need to be providing them with evidence-based solutions to the questions that they have and the goals that they have for their life.
Yeah,
And,
that's
I think
right.
understanding a little bit more about the classification of cerebral palsy will help us to choose those interventions at the right time or
Absolutely.
as early as possible, because we do know that cerebral palsy interventions are specific to
They are.
type and topography.
That's right.
And because we know that, trying to understand as early as we can about that, I think will make the best difference that we can possibly make.
Cathy, I am just blown away. I mean, even from that early intervention, the pre-conference workshop this morning, I came out of there and was like, wow, so excited. Not only that there's earlier detection and through things like your study that can be so clear, but then we can look at, classifying severity, and parents want that information. We can, from other things we heard this morning, the importance of walking alongside the parents as they go through that diagnosis. But then even from ones we meet in the clinic, they want to then jump into that early intervention because they're like, hey, we're told CP is highly likely. We want, there's not going to be any harm to jumping into some intervention, obviously, as long as you're not cutting into that family time and that special time for that child. And when we do that therapy, let's get in with those right types of therapy. And it's just so exciting.
Absolutely. And just
of
remember, there are a whole bunch of other domains that commonly affect children with cerebral palsy. And we heard about that in the workshop this morning. And I think that's so important to look at as well. And really, the review we've done didn't even address cognition, communication, feeding, any of those things. So there is just so many questions out there we're yet to answer around classification. I think we're just sort of getting started in this space, to be honest.
So much. So, Cathy, final statement from you with regards to this systematic review and your recommendations to clinicians who are out there working and trying to understand the data that's been presented. What would be your main message to them?
My main message to them would be careful when you're making predictions. Make sure families really want to know now. Maybe they want to wait and find out this information in the future. Make sure you're using evidence-based tools, but you can give good information quite early. You just can't give every piece of information. And we need to do more work to find that out. So go gently, but also use the evidence that we've got before us and encourage families encourage clinicians to give term equivalent MRIs to babies in the NICU.
Fantastic. Exactly. Yes.
That's a resource problem too, I know.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Cathy, for your time, for your contribution. There's so many people who are so inspired by the work that you do so genuinely so. And as I see the breadth of work that's being done, there's been so much that's been instigated by the work you've done, and it's the ripple effect. And it's a really exciting time to be in the field. So thank you so much.
And thanks for inviting me. Always lovely to talk to you both.
Thanks,
Love
Cathy.
it. Love it. All right, to all of our listeners, hope you really enjoyed that. Let us know if you have any other questions or if you have something specific for Cathy with regards to that study as well. You've got her email address. We will talk to you all again really soon. Bye.
Bye.